The doctor didn't look at me when he entered the room. He looked at the file first, then at the scan, then back at the file again, and in that small delay before he even spoke, I already knew my life had just changed. I'm 81 years old, and when you live that long, you learn how to read silence. That silence was louder than anything he could have said. The strange thing is, that morning had started like every other morning. I woke up before sunrise, the way old habits teach you to do, shuffled into the kitchen, made my coffee the same way I've made it for 40 years, too much cream, too much sugar, the way the doctor always told me not to. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after you've buried the person you shared it with. My wife passed 6 winters ago after 53 years together, and ever since then, the silence never really left. You don't get used to it, you just learn to move around inside it. The appointment itself was supposed to be routine. Just some breathing trouble, a cough that wouldn't go away, nothing dramatic. At 81, something always hurts, so you stop asking why. My daughter insisted I go. Dad, just check it, please. So I did it for her, not for me. Hospital rooms all smell the same. Clean, cold, like nothing human is supposed to stay there too long. I sat on that paper-covered bed listening to the air vent hum, and funny enough, when you wait for test results, you don't think about dying. You think about small things. Did I lock the back door? Did I feed the neighbor's cat? Did I pay the electricity bill? The brain protects you like that, keeps the big thoughts away until it can't anymore. When the doctor finally spoke, his voice was slow and careful, the kind doctors use when they already know you won't like what comes next. He said they found something on the scan. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. And somehow that made it worse. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. I wasn't scared. Not the way people imagine. No panic, no shock, just one very clear thought. So this is how the final chapter begins. Because at 81, you understand every chapter left is a short one. People think when you hear news like that, you think about death first, but you don't. You think about ordinary Tuesdays, the ones you assumed would last forever. The dinners you skipped. The calls you postponed. The apologies you thought there'd always be time for. When you're young, time feels endless. When you're old, it feels like it was always running faster than you realized. I worked my whole life. Factory supervisor for 37 years. Never missed a shift. Thought that made me a good man. Paid the mortgage, kept food on the table, sent the kids to school, did everything I thought a father was supposed to do. But sitting there in that hospital room, I realized something that hit harder than any diagnosis ever could. I had been present for their childhood, but I hadn't really been there. My son once asked me to watch his baseball game, and I told him I had overtime. My daughter waited by the window for me to come to her school play, and I blamed traffic. There was always something, always later. Life is full of laters until suddenly there isn't one. When I left the hospital, I sat in the car for almost 20 minutes without starting the engine, just watching people walk past. A couple arguing about groceries, a mother chasing a toddler, a man yelling into his phone about work. Normal life. The kind of life you assume you have unlimited access to until someone hands you a scan suggesting otherwise. I called my daughter and tried to sound normal, because fathers always try to sound strong, even when they're not. She knew immediately. Children always know. She didn't ask if she should come. She just said, "I'm coming over." And suddenly, I wasn't 81 anymore. I was just somebody's dad again. That evening, my house wasn't quiet. My daughter was cooking in the kitchen. My grandson was fighting with the TV remote. Someone laughed about something completely unimportant, and I sat there realizing this was always the important part. Not the job, not the overtime, not the promotions. Just this room, these people, this noise. Later that night, my grandson asked me, very simply, "Grandpa, are you going to be okay?" Kids don't dress things up. They just ask. And for a second, I didn't know what the honest answer was, because at 81, the word okay means something very different than it used to. That night, I made a decision, not about treatment, not about hospitals, but about time. Whatever time I had left, I wasn't spending it the way I spent the first 80 years. No more postponing visits, no more short phone calls, no more maybe next month. If someone mattered, they were getting my time now. And the funny thing is, life doesn't change in big, dramatic ways. It changes in tiny ones. Longer breakfasts, more walks with my daughter, sitting through my grandson explaining video games I barely understand, saying I love you before hanging up instead of assuming they already knew. Tiny things, huge difference. And once you start paying attention to time, you notice things you ignored your whole life. The way sunlight actually moves across the living room floor in the afternoon. The sound of your knees when you stand up, like old wooden stairs reminding you they've carried weight for decades. The taste of toast when you're not rushing to finish it before work. I realized most of my life had been lived at a speed that made everything blur together. Mornings, shifts, paychecks, weekends, repeat. I thought stability was the same thing as living. Turns out stability can sometimes just be a very comfortable way of disappearing slowly. A week later, I went back for more tests. More waiting rooms, more magazines nobody reads, more polite nurses pretending not to look worried.
Hospitals teach you patience whether you want to learn it or not.
Sitting there, I started talking to another old man across from me. Funny how illness makes strangers honest. Within 10 minutes, we knew each other's entire life stories. He told me he spent 45 years building a business, and now his sons run it and barely call. I told him I spent 37 years working overtime, and now I wish I'd worked less. We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because at our age, the truth is usually too late to fix, so laughing is the only gentle option left. Driving home that day, I didn't turn on the radio. I used to always need noise. News, talk shows, weather, anything. But lately, silence felt different. Not empty, just honest. And in that quiet, I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. The first tiny apartment my wife and I lived in where the heater barely worked. The way she used to fall asleep halfway through movies and pretend she was still watching. The night my daughter was born, and I was so scared to hold her, I made the nurse do it twice. First, so I could watch. None of those memories had anything to do with work or promotions or the extra hours I thought mattered so much. Life, it turns out, keeps a completely different scorecard than the one we spend decades trying to win. My daughter started visiting almost every day after that. At first, she said it was to help with groceries, but really, she just stayed and talked. About her job, about my grandson, about nothing important. And one afternoon, she said something that stayed with me. She said, "Dad, you know you don't have to be strong all the time anymore." And it hit me that I had spent 81 years thinking being a man meant carrying everything quietly, providing quietly, worrying quietly, aging quietly. But maybe the bravest thing left to do this late in life was to stop pretending I wasn't afraid sometimes. Because I was afraid.
Not always.
Not dramatically. Just in small human moments. Like when I woke up at 3 a.m.
And the house felt too still.
Or when I opened the medicine cabinet and saw more pill bottles than coffee mugs.
Or when I realized the world now moves faster than I understand, phones smarter than me, cars quieter than I can hear, grandchildren growing up in a world that barely resembles the one I learned how to survive in.
Getting old isn't one big moment.
It's 1,000 tiny realizations that the world is slowly continuing without needing your permission. But here's the strange gift nobody talks about. Once you accept that time is limited, decisions become incredibly simple. Petty arguments feel ridiculous. Holding grudges feels like carrying bricks for no reason. Impressing strangers becomes the most exhausting and pointless hobby imaginable. You start choosing comfort over pride, honesty over politeness, presence over productivity. I began telling stories at the dinner table I used to keep to myself, apologizing for things from 20 years ago, thanking people for things they probably forgot they ever did. And every single time, the world didn't fall apart the way I'd always feared it might. It just got lighter. Here's the truth nobody tells you about getting old. The diagnosis isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is realizing how much of your life you lived thinking there'd always be more time. So if you're listening to this and you're healthy right now, don't wait for a doctor to hand you a piece of paper before you start living differently. Call the person you've been meaning to call. Visit the place you keep postponing. Say the words you assume you'll say someday. Because someday has a way of arriving much sooner than anyone expects. I'm 81, and yes, the doctor told me something I wasn't ready to hear. But maybe it was exactly what I needed to finally understand what mattered all along. And if I get one more ordinary Tuesday, one more noisy dinner, one more phone call that lasts too long, I can honestly say now, I finally know how to live inside it.